Okay, so, this time you sent us some pretty intense stuff. Strategies for Humanitarian Ministries from Living Word Emmy missions. I mean, you've been giving this some serious thought, like how to really help people.
Yeah, definitely.
So for this deep dive, we're gonna, well, I guess our mission is to kind of break down those core ideas, the strategic principles for humanitarian work, the stuff you highlighted, and see how they connect to like the bigger picture of making a real impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What really struck me right off the bat was how these notes, they don't treat humanitarian work as just like an add-on.
Right.
It's right there from the beginning,
Yeah.
connected to the core of mission work. Like it's fundamental.
Okay, so let's dive into that connection, that foundational link. The notes jump right into this relationship between the Great Commission, going into all the world, and the Great Commandment, love your neighbor. It's like they're saying that caring for people in need isn't just a nice to have. It's,
Essential.
yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Essential to the whole mission.
Right, right. If we zoom out a bit, it suggests that any strategic planning in missions has to like bake in how to address human needs. It's not either, it's both, working together. The big takeaway here is that they're not separate things, but two sides of the same coin when it comes to effective outreach.
Okay, I like that. So with that as our foundation, the notes then get into some core principles that should guide these humanitarian strategies. First one up is, well, they call it the incarnational principle.
Right.
Big word. What's the main idea here?
So it's fascinating. It really emphasizes genuine respect for the values of other societies. But within, God's bigger plan, the idea is that the gospel, the message, it needs to become real, tangible.
Yeah.
It has to be seen and lived out in the missionary's life, not just talked about. Only then can it be, truly embraced.
Okay, so it's not just about showing up and telling people stuff.
Exactly.
It's about like embodying the message through action. And the notes also say that while humanitarian efforts can change, physical stuff, the real transformation, the deep one, comes when people recognize Christ. That seems like a really important difference.
Oh, it is. The notes are careful to point out that meeting physical needs is vital, but it should also be a way to connect with people where they're at, at their deepest point of need, where the message of love can really sink in. It's about being sensitive to the whole person, the whole human experience.
Right. So that leads perfectly into the next principle, the inclusive principle. This one's all about getting the people you're trying to help involved in the process itself. Why is that so important?
Well, it raises a really important question about ownership and about making things sustainable. If people understand and accept the missionaries' goals, their methods, they're way more likely to actually participate, and the impact will last longer.
Yeah.
The notes also bring in this idea of a holistic approach. They say that all ministries, whether it's evangelistic or humanitarian, should be connected, like supporting each other. Ultimately, if you want to see real change in humanitarian work, you got to empower the communities themselves.
Right.
It's about moving past just giving aid and actually helping them become independent.
Absolutely. It makes total sense that if people feel like they're part of the solution, they're going to be way more invested. And the notes also talk about moving toward personal empowerment instead of creating dependency and addressing those bigger injustices, political, social, economic, you name it, even psychological and spiritual. It's like a really broad view of what inclusive means in this context.
It is. It's about tackling the root causes, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms, and empowering people to make real lasting change in their own lives and communities.
Okay, so the third principle they talk about is the human need principle. And they give a pretty specific definition of what a humanitarian strategy actually is. What stands out to you in that?
It's interesting. The method they describe, it's about actively discovering the real causes of needs, not just assuming. Through research, through planning. The goal isn't just to stop suffering right now, but to set in motion processes that lead to a good quality of life. And, this is key, it includes the spiritual dimension.
So it's not just about like good vibes and wanting to help. It's about really digging deep and understanding the situation before trying to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about doing your homework, understanding the context, all the underlying issues that are actually causing the need.
Okay, so that leads us to the last core principle they talk about, the holistic principle. This one seems to tie everything together. Why is this holistic approach so important, according to the notes?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, they're arguing that for any real long-term impact, you got to address the whole person, the whole situation.
Right.
They define the overarching mission as reconciliation. Reconciliation to God, to each other, and to the environment. And all of this through, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and the notes talk about separation from God through sin, separation from each other that leads to, well, all kinds of inequalities, and separation from, like, our intended environment. It paints this picture of
Brokenness.
brokenness, yeah, on multiple levels.
Exactly. And they say the role of the missionary is to be, like Christ's ambassadors, bringing this message of reconciliation that mends those broken parts.
Mm.
This is where that whole idea of ministry and message being interconnected really becomes clear. Evangelists need to be aware of physical needs, and those working on the humanitarian side need to be aware of the impact of sin.
I like that they emphasize a people-centered approach over, focusing on programs or projects. That example of the starving child really drives it home. Like, you can't expect someone who's literally starving to get these big theological ideas if you don't address their immediate needs first.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. And the notes also warn against what they call spiritual bribery, this idea that service should be genuinely motivated by Christ's love, not a tactic to get people to convert. They reference 1 John and John 14 to underline that authentic care comes from Christ's nature.
Right. And then they even bring in a biological concept, holistic, like a symbiotic relationship in nature where things depend on each other. How does that apply to missions?
Well, it's like saying you can't separate someone's spiritual side from their actual life, their social, political, physical reality. It's all connected. Think about it like those relationships in nature where, different organisms rely on each other for survival. It's the same in missions. The spiritual well-being of a community is tied to their physical and social conditions. You can't just focus on one and ignore the others. And that example of the ghetto they use, it really hits this home.
Yeah.
All those overwhelming barriers, the complex questions that come up when you're trying to help people in extreme need, it makes you think about how to actually show love and care before you jump into explaining theology.
It really does make you realize one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly.
So with all these core principles in place, the notes then look at different ways to actually meet those human needs. They start with relief, the immediate response. How do they define that?
They present relief as like a short-term crisis response. What you do when people can't meet their basic needs without outside help. It's like a temporary fix for survival. And the notes point out that it's often easier to provide relief than it is to deal with the underlying causes of the problem.
Right, but even with relief, there's strategy involved. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just handing things out.
No, not at all. The notes emphasize that giving timely relief can really open doors for the gospel. And strategically, the aim should always be to help the community get back on their feet as quickly as possible without needing, constant assistance. The key here is that if the crisis goes on too long, you need to switch gears, think long-term.
Okay, so relief is that immediate response. Then we have development. What's the difference?
Well, development is more about those long-term processes, self-sustaining and participatory programs that address the root causes of, why people are suffering in the first place. The key words here are self-sustaining and participatory. It's about empowering people to help themselves in the long run.
And they make a really important point for missionaries here. They say that material progress, like improving people's living conditions without spiritual transformation, can actually backfire. Why is that?
They argue that a lot of those humanistic development plans, they fail because they don't deal with the deeper human stuff, things like greed, the desire for power, corruption. True transformation, they say, involves a shift towards both spiritual and physical wholeness. That quote they use from Wayne Bragg, it sums it up perfectly. It's about reaching a state of harmony with God, with each other, with the environment. It suggests that for real, lasting change, you got to address the inner person, not just the outer circumstances.
And they talk about fatalism, this idea in some parts of the world that things will never change. And they say that Christ is the only way to bring lasting change, to address those root causes.
Yeah.
That's a specific theological viewpoint they're putting forward.
Yeah, it is. And it really highlights that core belief that spiritual transformation is essential to overcome those deep-rooted problems that lead to human suffering.
Okay, and finally we have transformation. How does that fit in with relief and development?
Well, they present transformation as like the integration of both short-term and long-term responses, addressing the whole person, their whole life. It's about meeting those urgent physical needs while also starting those self-sustaining processes that can lead to a life, in line with Christ. A truly holistic approach. It's like bringing together immediate care and long-term empowerment, all pointing towards spiritual renewal.
And they really emphasize the importance of the planner being seen as an authentic representative of Christ, someone who actually gets the people's situation, not just some rich outsider coming in. That reference to Luke 7:19, where John the Baptist's disciples asked Jesus if he's the Messiah, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it shows that humility and genuine connection are so important. It's about being with people in their suffering and showing Christ's love in a real, tangible way.
Okay, so this all leads into their discussion of a strategic planning model. And they really break this down into steps. The first one is gathering data. What's essential here?
I think what's key is their focus on understanding what they call the felt needs of the community. They say successful projects are built on what the community itself sees as the problem.
Right.
It's not just about what we think they need. It's about really listening to what they're saying and getting to the bottom of those problems.
And they caution against just taking the word of political leaders, pointing out that they might have their own agendas. It emphasizes how tough it is to find solutions, but that this is the most important starting point, even if it means having to prioritize problems when the needs are overwhelming.
Right. You got to get a full understanding of the political scene, the social, environmental, religious, economic, everything to really grasp what's going on. It's about collecting information from all kinds of sources to get the whole picture.
Okay, the next step is analyzing data. So you've got all this info, now what?
Well, analysis helps you see how all these problems are connected. The notes say to move away from looking at individual issues and focus on broader problem areas because, well, a lot of times things are intertwined.
Right.
This analysis can be everything from your own observations to actually working with community leaders. The aim is to find those patterns and understand how all these factors are contributing to the needs.
Then we have setting objectives and goals. How do they define and separate these in the model?
Objectives are the big picture, the destinations of the project, the long-term aim, the outcome you want. They say they should be clearly stated, focused, realistic, have a clear reason for existing, and prioritized. Goals, on the other hand, are the steps along the way. They have to be achievable within a specific time frame, connected to each other, have clear ways to measure them, be adaptable, and also prioritized. It's like objectives are the what and goals are the how you're going to get there.
Okay, so objectives are the destination and goals are the roadmap. They stress having those clear indicators to measure progress, too. Makes sense? Got to know if you're actually making headway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that adaptability of goals is huge because things change. You got to be able to adjust.
Right. So next step is writing the action plans. Sounds like this is where the rubber meets the road. What are the key parts of a solid action plan?
Action plans are the specific, like nitty-gritty steps to hit a goal. They emphasize the who, what, when, how, and how much. You got to be crystal clear about what needs to be done, who's doing it, by when, how they're doing it, and what resources they need.
Makes sense.
They also highlight that it's got to be in a logical order, communicated clearly, and use checkpoints to track progress.
Yeah.
No room for confusion in a good action plan.
And they say after you draft those action plans, there's a really important review stage where you look at things like integrating spiritual steps, making sure the workload is balanced, and making sure the action plans actually lead to those objectives you set. It's like taking a step back to see the big picture again.
Exactly. Making sure all the pieces fit and the plan addresses both the practical and the spiritual sides of the work.
Okay, finally, we have monitoring and evaluating. This is where you figure out if your efforts actually worked. What's important here?
So evaluation is more than just counting what you did. It's about measuring your success against those original objectives, but also taking a hard look at the assumptions you started with. Were they right? They say it's crucial to measure both the quantitative stuff, the numbers, and the qualitative, like the actual changes in people's lives, their outlook. The training institution example really shows us it's not enough to just build it and train people. You got to see if their lives are better because of it.
Yeah.
Real evaluation looks at both the data and the stories of change.
And they point out that evaluation can also show you new opportunities, things you could do in the future, and help you develop even better programs, like a constant learning process.
Right.
The main goal, they say, is to help with all those different needs, but also to give you a way to adjust your approach. I think that's a really important point to end on when talking about planning.
It is. It highlights that strategic planning isn't a one-time thing. It's a cycle, a constant process of assessing and adapting to best serve the community.
All right, so the notes and give some practical examples of strategic application. First up is John Robb's homogeneous group concept. What's the core idea here?
So Rob's idea is all about grouping people based on things they share, like language, religion, ethnicity, jobs, or even situations like being a single mother or a street kid.
Mm.
The idea is that by figuring out these homogeneous groups, you can create programs that are more targeted, more effective, and that really tap into their existing connections and strengths.
So instead of a broad approach, you're zeroing in on specific communities within a larger population.
Exactly.
They give those examples like single mothers, taxi drivers, street children. It helps to visualize how it works.
Right. And to really see this concept in action, look at that example they give from Brazil, the one with the street children.
Huh.
They didn't just set up one orphanage. They came up with this whole multifaceted approach: halfway houses, social rehabilitation, foster care through churches, education provided by the city, job training through companies, even helping them reunite with their families. It's a huge collaborative effort that addresses the specific needs of that particular group.
Yeah, and the scale of that problem, millions of kids living on the streets, it really shows why you need that strategic, collaborative approach.
Yeah.
Then there's the Ethiopia example, dealing with drought. What stands out there?
What's striking is how the missionaries worked within the existing structures, those farmers' associations. They provided food relief, but then went further and gave them seeds and tools to get back on their feet. This, the notes say, let people stay in their homes, keep their dignity, which was different from those secular agencies that set up separate camps.
Right.
It really built trust and relationships within the community.
And the long-term impact is huge, right?
Oh, yeah.
They talk about overcoming centuries of resistance to the gospel and new churches being established in the area. It's like showing how meeting those practical needs in a smart way can open doors for bigger, more spiritual changes.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how a well-planned humanitarian effort, one that respects local structures and focuses on empowerment, can have a lasting impact, both spiritually and socially.
So bringing it all together, it seems like the big takeaway from this material is that you need a deeply integrated and planned approach to humanitarian ministries. It's not just about wanting to help, it's about understanding the real causes of need, involving the community, and aiming for that transformation that touches every part of life.
Exactly. And I think what's really interesting is that emphasis on understanding those felt needs within a community. It's a reminder that we don't always know what's best. We need to listen, build trust.
That's a good point. So considering all this, here's a thought for you. How might understanding the difference between relief, development, and transformation change how we approach even our local community support? It's not just something for overseas, is it?
No, not at all. And thinking about that homogenous group concept could be really insightful for tailoring support within our own communities, figuring out how to help those specific groups with their unique needs. We can be much more effective that way.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. Thanks for sharing this. It's been really insightful. It's definitely given me a deeper understanding of how effective humanitarian work really happens.